this morning, Russian missiles struck the Ukrainian city of Lviv, killing at least 7 people there and injuring some 11 others. Now, until now, the western city has been relatively shielded from the attacks rocking the rest of the country. Lviv's mayor says both military and civilian sites were hit.
Rockets were launched from aircrafts, but that is preliminary information. Whether this garage was the ultimate target, well, I don't really want to believe it, but on the other hand, maybe they were aiming for the railway station. We now don't have safe and unsafe locations in the city. The enemy is cynical and they're inhuman.
Well, to discuss in a bit more detail, our foreign affairs commentator Douglas Herbert is with me. And Doug, these attacks on Lviv are perhaps a sign that Russia is extending its reach, that the war is now entering a more dangerous phase. Do you think that Ukraine can count on getting the support, specifically the weapons it says it now needs as the fight intensifies?
Can count on? Absolutely not. Ukraine has had to huff and puff and basically go groveling cap in hand to the U.S. and Europe, despite that show of unity and the political show of unity, coming together, pulling out all stops to help Ukraine, to arm it, to send it weapons. Now those weapons being a mix of both defensive and offensive types of weapons. The fact of the matter is, as we see this war enter, as you correctly called, a dangerous, uncertain new phase with Russia really arraying its forces for an all-out assault on the east, but not just the east, also the north and southeast of the country, we can expect it to perhaps be, as intelligence officials have been warning, longer and bloodier, and the type of war where you will need really a sustained pipeline of weapons coming through for Ukrainian defense forces. They right now perhaps have enough, even with those massive announcements of the extra weapons that we saw from the U.S. in the past couple of weeks, the $800 million, despite, those shoulder-launched anti-aircraft types of weapons, all the javelins, the stingers, all of these weapons now coming in greater quantities. It will not be enough. Not me saying it, but military experts basically saying these weapons, you go through them quickly on the battlefield, especially when you're fighting a war on many different fronts, which this is expected to happen. Yes, the war will be concentrated in the east, but the east is a very, very large area. At the start of this war, Ukraine's army was perhaps slightly larger than that of France, maybe not as technologically advanced, but it's gone through a lot of weapons very quickly. And yes, it was very impressive. It even took Russia off guard in the early stages of the war with the fierceness of the resistance and its ability to hold off an army that was, by all accounts, about 10 times the size of its own. But now it is going to need those heavier weapons. It's going to need, not just the heavy artillery. It's going to need tanks. It's going to need what it's not getting, which is the fighter jets. We know why it's not getting the fighter jets, the fears of the West getting entangled in a broader conflict. But that said, yes, it's going to need much heavier weapons, and it's going to need them in a sustained way. And no, we do not have guarantees or even any signs at this point that that sustained pipeline is something that the West could keep the political will up. And also just the shortfalls logistically, that the U.S. right now has given a lot of its javelins to Ukraine, Biden appealing to U.S. arms manufacturers to boost their own production so the U.S. has some of its own javelins left. So it's very tricky, not just politically, but logistically for the West, for the U.S. and the Europeans to keep supplying Ukraine.
Now, Doug, reading the Western media, I suppose it's easy to get this idea that most people around the world support the resistance in Ukraine, but Russia does have its sympathizers and its backers, doesn't it?
Yeah, and what you just said, it's a wrong impression, at least numerically speaking. Most of the world's population live in countries, or most of the world's population are not in countries that support Ukraine in this war. You're right. In the West, it does seem like everyone's on board. The global response has been one of absolute unity, sympathy for Ukraine, getting Ukraine armed. The fact of the matter is, some of the world's biggest countries, obviously we've seen China's response. China obviously, staying on board with Russia in forming a bloc against the U.S., which is their common adversary. So China, if not, happy about the invasion, but at least it's been horrified by the invasion. It hasn't really done anything to stop Russia, to deter it. India, giant country, one of the biggest populations in the world right now, has been what's been called the messy middle. It has not really responded to Biden's pleas to take a tougher stance towards Russia. And I'll note that in that resolution at the early part of the war, condemning the Russian invasion, 34 countries abstained, many of them in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. We see a lot of countries just outright sympathizing Russia or just basically allying with it altogether, Syria, Eritrea, Belarus being among them.
Douglas Herbert, thanks very much.